Welcome, everyone. This is Pat Bailey, Director of Training at Out and Equal Workplace Advocates, and we welcome you to our virtual summit series. These are some of the best workshops that we had at our 2016 Out and Equal Workplace Summit. Today we're going to be looking at engaging middle managers and LGBT equality. This is a broadcast audio, so you should be hearing us over your computer speakers. The call does go from 12 to 1:15. It's a little longer than our standard 1-hour call. But if for some reason that you need to leave early, you can check out the recording. We'll send out a follow-up message and the slides after the call. If you have problems, you can use the chat box over on the left side at the bottom, and you can talk to all of us and send in your questions and comments. A couple of announcements before we get started. We're going to continue this virtual summit series through February 7th through the 28th, and you can see some of the topics there. Our next town call will be on February 23rd, and we'll be talking about generations in the workplace, LGBT perspectives. And March 27th through 29th is our executive forum. We have both executives, emerging, and young professionals will join us this year. And that week ends up with March 29th with our Momentum Leadership Gala. And then finally, October 9th through 12th next year, we're going to be in Philadelphia. So lots going on, and we're also keeping up on the current news. So we thank you for joining us today. And we're going to put some polls up, and on polls, what you do is you select your answers and then hit submit. So you can come and vote on the screen. We've got about 260 people on the call right now, and we're looking at what do you need next year in your training needs. What is you're either working on in your company, or what's the priorities? And we can see here we get a really high rating because this is a middle manager virtual summit. That's way high on top, as well as unconscious bias and developing allies. And it looks like we've got about a quarter of everyone's come in and vote. So remember to hit the submit button so we can see your results in there as well. And this gives us some ideas of what training we should be working on and be ready to present. And then we'll be able to design our program through this year. And just as a reminder, you can also contact us directly if you don't see anything on this list and would like to set up some custom training. Now we're going to move into the next portion on some polls to find out more about you and who's here in the audience. So it looks like we've got just a little over half the audience has responded on this. So let me go ahead and put the next poll question up. And that poll question is, what's your business sector? Who do you work for? And there's a list you can select from. Select your answer and hit submit. And again, we have aerospace, defense and security, banking, insurance, health and pharma, legal, manufacturing, nonprofit or academic, public sector or government, telecom, utilities, energy, consulting. And it looks like we've got about half everybody in at this point. Peter mentions he's in technology, Richard, finance, non-banking, Lisa, chemical. And looks like we've got just about everybody in. Media. All right. So that gives us an idea on the sectors that you're all working in. It looks like banking and insurance is the highest level that we've got on our poll. Now, next question is, what's your role within your company? What do you do? What's your role? And you can select all that apply in this one. Are you an executive, HR, D&I professional, ERG, BRG, employee resource group, business resource group, member or leader? Are you an LGBT employee, an ally, other? Go ahead and chat those in, not applicable or prefer not to say. Now we see quality improvement. Everybody's getting good at these. We're almost 2/3 in with the responses now. And we just jumped over about 300 participants on the call. We've got quality improvement, L&D managers. And then let me bring up the last poll here that we've got. And this one is about how do you identify as. And again, you can select all that apply and select those and submit those. And again, choices are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, ally, not sure, none of these. And you can chat in as well. And it looks like we have got about 40% of the call identifying as gay. 33% as allies. Welcome, allies. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you being here today. 20% identifying as lesbian. And we're, just in terms of the queer terminology, we're beginning to see more and more companies are starting to use the term queer these days, so it's the LGBTQ. So you'll hear us using and asking more about that, so we're going to open up that discussion. Joe says non-binary androphile. Thank you, that's great. All right, so it looks like we got almost everybody in on that. Let's go ahead and get started on the call, and I'm going to turn it over to Vignesh first. And go ahead, Vignesh. In fact, what I'd like to do is have everybody just introduce yourself real quick with your name and your title. I'll be chatting out your bios once we get a chance. So Vignesh, why don't you start us off?
Sure, Pat. Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and good afternoon to those in the U.S., and welcome to the session on engaging middle managers on LGBT inclusion. If I may take the privilege, Pat, of introducing my fellow panelists and myself to start with. My name is Vignesh, and I am Diversity and Inclusion Officer for JPMorgan Chase. I'm based in London, and my remit covers the entirety of Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Along with me, we have a very, very talented group of people today. The first, we have Violetta Dudov, who is Vice President and Senior Diversity Manager over in New York. We also have Therese Bechet-Blake, who is our Managing Director and Global Head of Diversity. And we had Don Wenzel, who is an Executive Director in our commercial bank and also headed up our Pride LGBT network previously. So I think a good place to begin in this session would be to reflect on why exactly it is that we are even considering this topic. And I think the most important thing to recognize is that many employers, or the best employers, have learned that if you want to institutionalize the importance of diversity across all levels of an organization, and if you want to capitalize on the strengths of your diverse workforce, you must develop strategic tools that help middle managers understand how diverse talent can enhance the performance of their teams. In most organizations, managers must be committed to the principles of diversity, but they should also start to model the desired behaviors and actively encourage others to do the same. And therefore, it becomes crucial that middle managers are equipped with the strategic tools necessary for them to build, maintain, and engage a diverse team where LGBT employees not just feel comfortable, but also feel confident to contribute their unique perspectives. What are we going to do today? So this workshop, although it is a webinar, it's going to be very interactive. And we're going to take you through a journey of how we came about in engaging our middle managers and galvanizing them in order to promote LGBT equality. After a brief panel workshop, we will be diving straight into a set of top tips, recommendations that we have learned over the years that might be useful to apply within your own organization. But what is the panel discussion going to be about? Now, we're going to start off by giving you an overview of our journey, where we began, why we thought it was important to even begin considering engaging middle managers, and how we ended up with our toolkit for our middle managers. And Therese, our head of diversity, will be going over that. After we complete that section, we're going to look at specific elements within the toolkit that we have put together for our middle managers on LGBT inclusion. 3 elements of this toolkit in specific will be discussed. First, we're going to have Violetta, who's going to be talking about our trans guidelines and how they evolved through the implementation phase and through us socializing it across the bank. Then we're going to hear from Dawn, who is going to talk about the training that we provide for our middle managers and how effective that has been. And lastly, we'll hear again from Therese, who will talk about our self-ID project, how we rolled it out globally across different socio-political and legal contexts. And then you'll hear back from me at the end, and I'll bring you back with the top tips and give you some tools and tips to take away and start implementing in your own organization. But before we dive straight in, 2 quick disclaimers. The first is that this is going to be a very honest appraisal of our journey, the pitfalls that we've experienced, the challenges we've experienced. And so in order for us to be candid about it, we would ask the Chatham House rules apply. But second, we also want to add that what works for us as a bank that is multinational and has over 200,000 employees globally might not work for you. And what's important to recognize through listening to our journey is to understand that whatever journey, whatever steps you take, they need to be tailored to the specifics of your organization and what works for you. Hopefully by the end of this session, there will be elements of our journey that you can benefit from and you can take away and implement right away. So to get you started, we have a bit of an interactive element, and I'm handing over to Therese, who's going to take you through the poll.
So thank you, Vignesh. So I'd like to start with a poll question. And the question is, does your company have a business case for diversity and inclusion? Okay. Seeing the yes indicator roll up really rapidly, which is encouraging, starting to slow down a little bit. Okay. So it looks like we still have a few more results coming in, but they all seem to be in the yes category. So it does look like the majority of the folks on the phone at least have the foundational element of a business case for diversity within their organization. So it looks like we have roughly 185 yeses, a few not sures, roughly around 46, and then it looks like a handful of organizations that don't or where it's not applicable. So let's go a little bit deeper. So of those 189, 190, we're still picking up people, I want to ask a follow-up question. So of those firms that have a business case, could you respond to this next question, which is, does your business case specifically reference LGBT inclusion? Ooh, I'm excited by the answers. It looks like a good majority of folks are responding yes. Just waiting for a few more to tick in, but it does look like the majority of the organizations do. And I think that that is absolutely fantastic in terms of organizations understanding the importance of having not only a business case for diversity, but a business case for diversity that specifically calls out LGBT inclusion. From our vantage point here at JPMorgan Chase, the cost of entry right into the D&I space for an organization is obviously being able to articulate a business case for diversity that is relevant and resonates within your organization. But I'd argue that if you really want to build support and make progress for LGBT employees, you have to have a business case that addresses LGBT inclusion specifically, and it needs to resonate with managers deeper in the organization. So what I want to do on the next few slides is actually walk you all through some of the rationale and the data that we used in building this particular case, but building the case with a specific eye on the latter part of what I just mentioned. How do you make this message resonate deeper in the organization, or as we like to call it, in the frozen middle, or the middle management of an organization? So let me see if I am going to do this correctly. Move to the next slide. Perfect. So why engage middle managers? I would argue that there are 4 reasons, and they're somewhat interrelated as to why it's important to engage middle managers. The first would be that managers are the ones who drive engagement within an organization. A Towers-Watson study found that effective management constitutes 2 of the top 5 drivers of employee engagement. And those 2 drivers relate to respect and having a sincere interest in the employee's well-being. The second reason is inclusion is key to an engaged workforce. People want to feel included. Data shows inclusion positively impacts retention, while unwelcoming environments significantly dampen employee engagement. The third reason is that middle managers help create inclusive environments, or said another way, middle managers can be one of the major impediments to having an inclusive environment. There's an interesting organizational dynamic at work when you think about it. If you can envision a pyramid, and at the top of the pyramid at the point, you have executives who are focused on long-term strategy, and at the base of the pyramid, you have employees, right? Grassroots employee groups. Many of you represent your business resource groups. And that layer of the organization is often very much focused on the immediate actions, things that impact them. And what that leaves you with is the middle, which is comprised of these managers who are often more vested in preserving the status quo than in implementing change. So specific outreach and engagement can make a significant difference by helping to break down those walls. And finally, engaged managers create the next generation of leaders. So ensuring that they are exposed to the power of diversity and inclusion will enable them to model positive behaviors that those under them, some of whom will be the future leaders in your organization, will emulate. The Center for Talent Innovation refers to this exposure as acquired diversity. And their research shows that managers with acquired diversity are twice as likely to exhibit behaviors like the ones listed on this slide, which are behaviors that lead to greater engagement and innovation within organizations. So what's the cost from the employee's standpoint of not having engaged, supportive managers? In a nutshell, this slide illustrates that there's a high correlation between support from managers and whether or not employees decide to be out in the workplace. And finally, we have the HRC Cost of the Closet survey results, which show impacts ranging from increased absenteeism to turnover to feelings of depression and distraction and having to outright lie at work when managers fail to create supportive environments. So armed with this data, what did we at JPMorgan Chase do? We created a toolkit called our Blueprint for Managers, which specifically calls out ways for managers to become engaged with our diversity and inclusion strategy around LGBT inclusion and gives them concrete actions and behaviors that they can take to foster an inclusive environment. And we were very deliberate in calling this a toolkit as opposed to calling it training. And I would say that was deliberate because I'm sure our organization, like many of your organizations, suffer from what I like to call training fatigue. Right? We're in a highly regulated industry. I saw that a lot of our participants are in the financial services industry, so this may resonate with you. So when you talk about additional training for employees and for managers, you tend to get the eyes glazing over. You get the immediate reaction of, is there an assessment? You know, how do I get to that? I just want to, you know, get through, pass the assessment, and get back to their real work. So what we find is that the ability for managers and employees to really take away useful tools and tips that they can then incorporate into their everyday work lives is very limited when you call something training. And so what we wanted to foster with our Blueprint for Managers was actually intact management team discussions that were focused on an honest assessment of how that work group and how individuals in that work group are functioning, and give them an opportunity to look at case studies that actually are other managers expressing problems or challenges or issues that they've overcome by leveraging the power of diversity and inclusion. We wanted to give them a self-assessment tool to really reflect on where they could focus their energies, where there may be opportunities for them personally and for the entire work group. And we wanted to actually arm them with what can you do? So give me concrete examples of actions and behaviors and questions that I should be doing or asking as a manager, as a leader within the organization to foster a more inclusive environment, bring awareness to issues that LGBT employees face, and actually create a really supportive and nurturing environment for all employees, but especially employees who identify as LGBT. So that in a nutshell is what we designed and have rolled out across the firm in terms of the toolkit. And it actually on a fundamental level connects with our overall diversity and inclusion strategy, and again also answers that time-honored question of just tell me what you want me to do, which I'm sure in many of your organizations are the questions that you get asked a lot by managers and leaders who want to be helpful, but again, struggle with that question of what exactly we can do. And what we found in rolling this out is that it's sparking a lot of honest questions and dialogues in a safe space where people can actually become educated and truly understand what it means to be an ally and to be supportive and to actually create a work environment that's supportive. So with that, I will stop and turn it over to Violetta to take you through our next section.
Thanks, Therese. So our new transgender, gender identity, and gender expression guidelines are another tool that we would like to share with you, again, targeted at middle managers or actually all managers, employees, as well as HR. So first, let's take a quick poll. Can you answer this question for me? Does your organization have a policy or guidelines in place that specifically cover transitioning at the workplace? Wonderful. I see a lot of yeses. 20% no, and climbing. Yeses are down to 55%. Okay. All right. So half of us here on the phone today seem to have the transgender guidelines in place. And so obviously, you all know it's a best practice to have transgender guidelines in place to help employees, managers, and HR navigate gender transitioning in the workplace and ensure a positive experience. But beyond this, we at JPMorgan Chase actually expanded our guidelines to further include gender fluid and gender expression scenarios. So now our guidelines go beyond just the transitioning from male to female or from female to male and bring these additional concepts and workplace situations to life. So for those of you, that's 50%, that said there you just don't have any transitioning guidelines in the workplace, you would want to start, probably by developing just the transgender guidelines. But think about what I'm going to tell you next, and see if maybe that can apply as well. For those of you that already have the transgender guidelines, I think, the situations, right, that we bring to life with our guidelines, for example, a gender fluid employee can present as a man some days and as a woman on other days, and the guidelines help all the stakeholders know what to do. Our new guidelines also affirm that gender expression applies to all employees equally and helps connect the dots between our code of conduct and what managers, employees, and HR need to do so that everyone is truly comfortable bringing their whole self to work. What do I mean by this? So here is an example. Let's take a hypothetical figure. Bob comes to work wearing garments traditionally associated with female attire. And he says he identifies as a gay man. He is not transgender and does not plan to undergo a transition. What should the manager do? Well, the manager reads now the new guidelines where we talk about these scenarios and bring them to life and knows that gender expression applies equally to all employees, not just transitioning employees. And so the manager knows how to support and what to do. So our new guidelines help make it easy to navigate the process, to know who to call and what to do, and they promote open communications. They are also, in terms of scope, they're global guidelines, and we ensure that in each of our regions, we place them in a central location. So virtually creating a one-stop shop for employees, managers, and HR, where everyone can go and get the same direction, the same communication, which is also, we believe, quite important. So for us at JPMorgan, putting this new model in place took just over a year. As I mentioned before this, our guidelines focus primarily on gender transitioning in the workplace. So for this part of it, for the new part of it, here are some learnings that might be of help to you. So we approached this project, as I mentioned, from the very start as a global project, so that we could bring all of our stakeholders with us along on the journey. So we had a global work team in place with diversity, HR, employee relations, of course our Pride BRG, but also teams like legal and security, because again, think really of all of the stakeholders that you need to bring on the journey. Then very important to review your company's dress code, and especially if you have uniforms, it's good to take a close look at the catalog where employees go to purchase these uniforms and make sure that really everything works. So, for example, can you make an online purchase from the female catalog if in the system, in the HR system, you're coded as a male or vice versa? And then for the gender fluid aspect, really consider operationalizing the concept of having 2 ID badges. Again, the conversation with security and having those security partners on board is particularly helpful here. Think about countries, if you're a global organization where LGBT is illegal, and work with your legal departments and with your colleagues in legal to come up with solutions that work. And one important thing that we did kind of throughout the journey is we talked with Out and Equal, we talked with Lori Fox, we talked with also with HRC, and across the regions with partners that we have in the region, such as in the near, we talked with Stonewall. And then, of course, guidelines. Make sure that there is training sessions that in place and that you're socializing the guidelines with all stakeholders. And most of all, make sure you have an inclusive workplace environment where middle managers really and truly understand the importance of diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And so, Dawn, turning to you for this latter part around creating that environment.
Great. Thank you, Violetta. So let's start by taking a quick pulse check on inclusion training for middle managers across the organization today. And let's start with this question. How many of you offer diversity and inclusion training to middle managers? You could go online and start populating answers. All right. Strong response so far. I see 50% do offer specific LGBT training for middle managers. Okay, some not sure's are creeping up here. Okay, looks like it looks like about half of the audience has some type of diversity and inclusion training for middle managers. So let's take it down one level, get a bit more granular, and ask another question. So of those who offer training, does the content specifically cover issues that are related to LGBT inclusion? Okay, so if folks can go in, answer. Looks like we're running about 50% have LGBT specific training. Okay. All right, looks like we're holding about 39 to 40% that do have LGBT specific components to their middle manager training. So let's advance ahead then to the next slide. And to address this need for middle manager training within the LGBT workspace at JPMorgan, we have developed a specific training module. And it's titled Inclusion in the Workplace, Building Bridges with LGBT Employees. We typically just shorten that to Building Bridges. And this is a training module that we did develop primarily in-house through our Pride BRG, but obviously in strong partnership with our diversity and inclusion partners as well as human resources. And the training is focused specifically on enhancing LGBT awareness and sensitivity for those middle managers at JPMorgan. There are three primary goals that we have tried to expose with Building Bridges. First, we want to make sure that managers walk away with a better understanding of the lived experiences of our lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender employees. And by that we mean we really want them to get a sense of what it's like to walk in the shoes of an LGBT employee at the firm. Second, as managers, it's really important that they assess the current environment for LGBT employees within their group or within a larger team, and understand how the environment affects workplace productivity and the overall business case. Super important as managers. And finally, goal is to understand individual and organizational behaviors that demonstrate an inclusive workplace. So that specifically means what can you do as a manager and what can your teams do to make sure that you are creating the most LGBT inclusive workplace possible. Okay, if we could advance the slide. There are some best practices that we have captured from conducting this training now over several years. So by way of setting the stage and creating facilitation best practices, make sure, and it's super important that folks know at the very onset of the training that whatever is shared in a safe space. So people are free to share their thoughts. Obviously some of the topics are very sensitive, so we do ask people to be respectful. But it is important that people know they have the license to share freely. That's how you really get down to the truth of what the real DNA is like in the workplace. Also make sure that you empathize and acknowledge with your training audience that these discussions, they can be difficult, they can be emotionally charged for some employees. So you really need to challenge your participants to dig deep and challenge themselves. And then make sure that if you are involved in facilitating the session, that you are real. So much like we try to create environments that are inviting for our employees to be genuine and authentic, if you're facilitating the training, be genuine and authentic yourself. It's not it's not that you have to have all the answers. In fact, sometimes participants might feel more comfortable if facilitators give the participants license to challenge gently, and just make sure that they're heard. Okay, in terms of the format of the training itself and the logistics, so we typically find that a target class size of around 25 to 30, that's in-person delivered training, is ideal. And again, while this is targeted toward middle managers, we have done some of these sessions that have some blended audiences with more senior managers and then some individuals that don't currently manage employees. The format of the training is, as I mentioned, it is instructor-led and it is live in person, typically lasts between 60 and 90 minutes. And we have a team approach in terms of delivering the training and contributing to the training that includes typically a facilitator from the Pride BRG network. So that's somebody who is completely familiar with the training materials. We have found that an ally co-facilitator can be super powerful because obviously your audiences are a blend of LGBT, ally, and otherwise. So having a powerful ally voice as part of the facilitation group can really be a powerful tool. We like to have a colleague from our learning and development team participate, as well as a critical component is having an HR colleague either in the room or on the phone. There are questions that arise from time to time that are difficult, that are very much of an HR nature, and really best and most appropriate for a professional HR colleague to answer. So we absolutely make sure that every session is staffed with an HR colleague. We also like to have a senior level individual, so managing director level or above, who introduces the training session, sponsors the training in essence, gives their stamp of authority in the introduction to the training, and just stresses how important it is to make sure that we do take seriously the need to build inclusive workplaces for our LGBT employees. We also like to have an apprentice trainer where possible to build the bench of future trainers for the Building Bridges sessions. We also house the training materials for building bridges on the firm's centralized training resource repository, so folks can individually take the training, and that is in the nature of basically a taped session of a live training that occurred a couple of years ago, along with a how-to toolkit. So folks can, again, individually take the training if they so desire, or if they want to, explore whether they think the training may be beneficial for their team, they can get a quick view of what that training actually looks like. In terms of the content of the training, if we could advance the slide, a couple sections of the training in essence. So obviously we have the introduction where we set forth the objectives of the training. That's the baseline. Why are we here? What are we trying to accomplish? We then go into what is a really interesting component of the training. So it's what we call an introspection exercise. And basically what we do is we project a series of images, 6 to 8 images typically, of individuals or of couples. Some are gender ambiguous, some appear to suggest an obvious gender preference, but they all are a little challenging in some ways. And what this experience does is it allows everyone to see that they themselves, no matter whether they are LGBT, ally, or otherwise, they all enter the training with some kind of inherent bias, right? So they all form impressions based upon the images that they see during the introspection exercise. It really helps people prepare for, oh my gosh, I really need to, sit close and listen, because while I may think I know everything about, our LGBT colleagues, or I am LGBT, I have some things I still need to learn. In the training, we try to baseline in the beginning with definitions. Obviously it's important that folks who are less comfortable or less familiar with the dialogue in the LGBT community, the lingo, if you will, that we set forth what the actual definitions are in the LGBT community. And then we move into the guts of the training, and the guts really center around a deep discussion of how issues of sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, how they present themselves in the workplace, and why they matter. We also review in pretty good detail what I think of as the rules and the expectations of the workplace. So what is the environment? What does your non-discrimination policy say? What is the scope of your anti-harassment policies? So that gives you a good baseline on, again, what are the rules and the expectations of employees as they walk about the workplace every day. And then we spend quite a bit of time reviewing internal and external data to show the impacts on our LGBT employees of an inclusive, or in some cases, a less than inclusive workplace. So Therese referenced the HRC Cost of the Closet report. There's a lot of good data in there that has many telling stories that help open eyes. So we do focus on data points from both our internal surveys, employee satisfaction surveys, as well as external data like HRC Cost of the Closet report. So we then break into smaller groups, typically 5 to 6 individuals, and we run through 2 to 3 different what we call workplace situations. So these are set up as real life scenarios that you as a manager are presented with in your small group, and you're given 5-6 minutes to talk through with your group how you might address this situation in the workplace. And then we gather back together and we debrief from the breakout sessions. This is where we typically see the most amazing interactive sharing occur. Of course, the baseline knowledge that's shared in the core content of the training is super important, but I think where the learnings really take on the aha moment is in these workplace situations. They are dynamic, they are presented in a real life context, and managers seem to really relate to how to problem solve. So we find that this is a very, very useful exercise. And then we talk about making a difference. So we challenge everyone that attends the training to think about what they will do as a personal takeaway, or what they will ask their teams to do as managers as a result of taking the training. If we could move forward on the slide, key messages. So what we try to emphasize in the training are a couple of things. First of all, words and how we describe things do matter. So how you ask questions, how you describe things, they all matter. Put yourself in the shoes of an LGBT employee and think about how those words and the way they're intonated actually might resonate with an LGBT employee in the workplace. Second, don't assume, period. And that means any of us. So whether straight, LGBT, ally, or otherwise, don't assume. Don't assume that LGBT folks think or believe certain things, and likewise, if you're an LGBT employee, don't assume that your non-LGBT colleagues automatically have certain impressions or beliefs. We do want to make sure that a key message taken away from the training is that an inclusive workplace really does matter, and it matters for several reasons. First of all, for talent, right? So the best way to attract and to have high-performing and satisfied employees who stay and show strong retention is to have a fully inclusive LGBT-friendly workplace. Inclusive workplace also matters for performance, right? So we know that employees are much more productive where they're comfortable, where they experience less stress in the workplace, where they don't have to worry about who they are, their motivation is increased, and obviously that translates into productivity. And then of course there's the business case, and the business case takes several elements. So there's the business case from the perspective of, our customers that we serve, no matter what our business is, they are diverse just like the workplace that we come to every day. So our customers, they appreciate seeing the diversity in the companies that they do business with. That's super important. We also know that the LGBT population has a very high customer loyalty rate. So there is a business case around making sure that we demonstrate as a company that we are LGBT friendly. We also know that the LGBT community has a fairly deep wallet, so there is definitely a business opportunity there, just from purely the sort of the wallet business case. In short, the key message is a successful LGBT inclusive workplace is one that focuses on respect, right? So that's behavior in the workplace, not around changing belief. And this is a super important principle. In the training, people sometimes get hung up on, thinking that the goal of the training is around changing belief. Not at all. It's about making sure that we focus on a fully respectful workplace, and we focus on behaviors that motivate and do produce that workplace. So the ideal workplace environment where employees can feel comfortable as LGBT folks, they have the full opportunity to share who they are, but they are not required to do so. So they maintain agency over their degree of outness, if you will, in the workplace. Okay, so now let's turn our attention to identification and self-identification of LGBT employees in the workplace. And Therese, I think we're handing back to you.
Thank you, Don. So moving forward to our next poll question, wanted to get a sense from the audience as to how many of your organizations allow staff to self-identify their sexual orientation and gender identity. Okay, starting to see. One is coming in. Okay, so we're almost at the 60% mark in terms of yes, but with a good chunk still coming in, with a good chunk, 30 or so, north of 30 or so percent that either have plans to or don't. Okay. Perfect. So the reason we asked that question is because for us as an organization, I wanted to understand kind of where you all are, because for us as an organization, it was the next logical step. And so I'm guessing for the 60% of folks that are out there that have organizations that do self-identify or provide that opportunity, they too may have felt like it was the next logical step in the D&I journey. So for us as an organization, we had historically measured typical things like ethnicity, gender, veteran status, and to some extent we were able to look at our employee base and look at it from a generational standpoint, right? Because we have in our HR systems information around date of birth and can therefore segment the population. But and that was the information that we typically produce metrics and reports on for our business leaders. And so that left many people questioning the disconnect between our speaking about diversity and inclusion in a very broad sense, but only providing metrics and data for folks in a very narrow way. And so in 2014, we undertook a global project to expand the demographic information that we captured as part of our employees' HR record or profile. So we had previously been doing as part of our employee opinion survey or climate survey, which I think a number of organizations represented on this phone may also do. We did include a self-identification question as part of that, but the distinction that I'm drawing is that as part of those employee opinion surveys and climate surveys, the information is not actually part of an employee's record. And so there's not an ability to look at things like trajectory and to track those employees and what may be happening with those employees so that you can derive meaningful information that may impact your policies and your programs and other things that you do as an organization. So we moved from doing it as part of the employee opinion survey to now actually making it part of the HR record. So what is it that we capture? So as I mentioned, this was a global initiative. So we are capturing sexual orientation broadly speaking. So we didn't want to just ask people whether or not they were lesbian, gay, bisexual, or for gender identity, ask them if they were transgender. We wanted to capture 100% of the firm. And so we do ask the sexual orientation question that asks, are you heterosexual, et cetera. And then on gender identity, we did then add the question around transgender so that there's an opportunity for folks to identify it as transgender. And then the next component, so that we could make this data usable, right? Because there's the one piece of it, which is having the demographic information, right, as to how people identify. But in order, at least in our opinion, to make the data usable, we needed the next part of the question, which is whether or not you're out or open in the workplace. And so if you do identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or under gender identity, identify as transgender, a secondary question comes up asking you whether or not you're out or open in the workplace. And we have a little information box that also comes up which discloses to employees how we as an organization intend to use that data so that they can make an informed decision as to whether or not they want to answer that question. And again, the point in asking that and in disclosing that is because we really wanted to be able to do something with the information, right? We wanted to make sure that we could think about this when we're thinking about the Out and Equal Conference, the Workplace Summit, and who we send. We wanted to think about it from a speaker standpoint. We wanted to think about it from other developmental programs and trying to look to see whether or not we are really sending a diverse representation of the firm through these programs and through these opportunities. We wanted to know who we may be able to reach out to as we're thinking about enhancements to HR policies or procedures, like Violetta spoke about in terms of the transgender guidelines and gender expression guidelines. So we wanted to make sure that the data we were collecting was really usable and that we wouldn't only be able to go to our Pride Business Resource group in order to source people for these opportunities and to be sounding boards, if you will, for the firm. So what were the restrictions, right? Because again, we live in a global environment, we're a global company, and so unfortunately there are certain countries where we operate where this is not legally permitted, right, to gather this information, or where gathering this information might endanger our employees. So those were definitely guideposts as we went through this journey around self-identification to say that we would never want to put our employees in harm's way, and certainly don't want to run afoul of the legal environment or cultural norms in a particular jurisdiction. So we did launch this in over 16 countries, and we have plans this year to expand that, but there's 16 of the largest countries where we operate and have employee populations. And so this year we're planning to expand that now so that we cover all jurisdictions where we're legally permitted, where, and again, where it doesn't put our employees in harm's way. And as I mentioned before, how are we using this data, right? So it's informing the policies and practices, it's enhancing our development and retention efforts. And so, when we were going through this journey, we spent a good amount of time talking to companies that had previously done this. So we certainly were not a first mover from this vantage point, but we did want to learn from the best practices and lessons that other companies that had done this before us would share with us. And so one of the things that we had been cautioned about from the beginning was, don't expect a rapid uptake once you roll this out. And so we did take that message to heart around setting expectations for how quickly, employees were going to go in and provide this information. But what that really triggered for us was the realization that we needed to very clearly articulate to employees, especially in the U.S., the value proposition, right? The what's in it for me around self-identifying and entrusting the company with this information. And so we've done a number of campaigns across the firm to bring awareness to the fact that we now have this ability for folks to self-identify. Our Pride Business Resource Group has been hugely helpful in helping to spread the word. We did pushes around things like National Coming Out Day to reemphasize to folks that there is this opportunity to do self-identification, and that was an effort in conjunction with our Business Resource Group. And we've done other firm-wide campaigns around self-identification. And the tagline that we like to use, and no one can steal this, please, is that we want to be able to paint the picture of who we are as a firm, not just what we are. And so providing this extra information, and we coupled this with other self-identification or demographic information that we wanted to capture, languages spoken, all those types of things. So again, that we can paint a richer picture of who we are as a firm. And again, also with the what's in it for me, leverage and showcase examples of how the provision of this data has enabled us to tap a wider audience of our lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender employees to participate, as I mentioned, in developmental opportunities or speaker opportunities or opportunities to represent the firm at dinners and other events. So we're very much in the stage of trying to gather as many examples as we can and continue to showcase and do potential video content and other content to help people to understand the value proposition, the what's in it for me, the what good things can happen to me as a result of providing and entrusting the firm with this information. So that's our self-identification journey. We're still a bit young. As I said, we started the project in 2014. We rolled this out in the latter half of 2015, so it took us roughly a year plus to kind of get everything in order and get it all ready, because it is tricky when you're a global company and you're looking at all the different various legal jurisdictions, data privacy restrictions outside of the U.S., et cetera. And so we launched in late 2015, so we've got just over a year under our belt in terms of self-identification. And we, as I said, intend to continue to expand so that we're covering all the countries where we legally can, and continue to look for ways to articulate that value proposition and encourage people to self-identify.
Thank you, Therese.
So with that, I will turn it back over to Vignesh.
Thank you, Therese. So you've now heard about three critical elements of gamut of tools that we put out for our middle managers. And you heard first about the importance of having a consistent message from Violetta in our trans guidelines, a single document that managers and employees can access to get information about what is expected and what the expectations might be through the transitioning process. You heard from Dawn about the importance of creating safe spaces and training rooms where managers can feel free to ask questions that they might not feel comfortable asking otherwise. And you heard from Therese how it is important to equip managers with the right data sets that might help them identify problem areas or areas that they might want to concentrate their efforts on. Now, obviously, these elements of our toolkit are elements that work for us and elements that sprung up at the time where we encountered certain difficulties along our journey of creating the ideal set of tools for our managers. But it might not be the case. It might not be the case that you start out with, say, self-ID or start out with building a trans guideline. You might need to start out at the very basics, at building your business case, and that's what we're going to on the next slide. What we're going to list out here are some top tips. If Pat could go to the next slide. We're going to list out some top tips that we collected during our live conference, during the live workshop, based on getting the crowd to work through some ideas about how exactly they might build their business case, what are the critical pitfalls to avoid, and how they might articulate it to different audiences. So the first thing that we learned from this interaction is that it's really important to tailor your business case to the nuances of your organization. Sometimes we often have organizations that talk purely in terms of the monetary bottom line, that building an inclusive environment might increase productivity, it would reduce staff absences. While all of these elements are important, you need to think through what is most critical to your organization. Let me give you one example. If you are in the nonprofit sector providing services to service users, say for instance if you're a nursing home, the way in which you articulate your business case might not be the same as the way in which a large financial services organization like ourselves might articulate it. You would need to think about the service users, how you can enhance the quality of care that you provide to them. So it's about thinking through what are the levers that operate your business, what are the important variables in your business, and articulating the business case in those terms. The second thing I would say is tailor the business case to your audience. Now you need to think through who exactly it is that you're trying to convince. Sometimes when you're talking to an internal audience, you might include details that you might not necessarily include when talking externally, which is more of a public forum where you're improving your brand image. Not to say that either is more important, but to say that when communicating your business case, always keep an eye on what your end goal is. Is it to convince the senior leader that they need to invest more into the diversity and inclusion program? In that case, you want to talk about what exactly it is that the senior leader values, or what are the quarterly performance metrics that they value. If it's about encouraging the public to see you as an organization that values diversity, specifically LGBT diversity, how are you going to communicate it? Is it going to be in the same terms that you use perhaps to communicate it internally? Perhaps not. It might be more in terms of celebrating your successes. It might be more in terms of celebrating the awards you might receive, or more in terms of publicizing the fact that you've entered various programs and indices that help you create a more inclusive environment. The next thing I would say is that it is important to keep your business case simple and relevant. When I say simple and relevant, I specifically always think in terms of the basics of people perform better when they can be themselves in the workplace. So think about enhancing creative outputs and how creating an inclusive environment might enable that. Think about how you can improve attrition levels, enhance staff loyalty, and think about improving the services that you offer to your customers, clients, and service users. Very often organizations tend to get caught up with the quantitative metrics around the business case. But sometimes the most powerful arguments and the powerful stories that can be told aren't necessarily quantitative. You can't necessarily put a value on inclusion in every single case. So it's important to also bring out the stories and the personal anecdotes through your business case, as important as it is to bring out the bottom line. I would also say that when you're building this business case, think about targeting the right people at the right time. When you're going through internal engagement, it is important that you begin not just at the top down, which is what most people tend to think, that get your senior leaders on board and everything else will be fine. In most organizations, you wouldn't find a senior leader that says diversity and inclusion isn't important, and yet we find that in many organizations, it is the middle management that seems to be stuck. So it's about ensuring that the messages that you send to these different groups of people occur in a timely fashion and come from the right people as well, and is cascaded down through the appropriate channels in your organization. So once you've built this business case, once you have this basic argument, here is why this is important set out. The next thing you might want to consider is what exactly is the training, resources, and ongoing support you want to offer to your middle managers. So if you go to the next slide, I capture some of the top tips that we collected during the session on these topics. So when you think about the training, you want to tailor your training for middle managers. So while diversity training generally will include things such as legislation, the policies of your organization, the business benefits that you articulate in your business case, you want to become a bit more sophisticated when you target specifically your middle managers. Particularly, you want to give them the skills to challenge discrimination and inappropriate behavior in a manner that's constructive and helps build team ties. You want to make sure that managers who end up sitting on recruitment panels and promotion panels are aware of their biases and are able to counteract them through the decision-making process. And critical for that is for them to receive things like unconscious bias training. Now, you may think that unconscious bias training is very expensive to invest in, or it takes a lot of time and energy to create that training, but it's not necessarily the case because there is a variety of online training platforms that are very cost-effective out there that you could use in order to upskill your managers on this topic. In addition to training, now training is something that happens once in a manager's life. So they do this training once, and then they might forget about what they've learned through their training process, which is why it's important that after training, they can always go to some source of support that can always provide them with answers should they have difficulties through the management process. So say, for instance, someone in a team comes out to a manager as wanting to transition in the workplace. Now, the manager might not remember everything that he has been told through the training process. And so that manager needs to be able to go to a centralized point where he can access information or she can access information about what exactly they need to do in order to make that employee feel supported. So this can include things like help guides. It can include best practice research from organizations like HRC, Stonewall, Out and Equal, and you can compile all these reports, compile all these resources into one centralized learning hub, or in our case, we call it the Blueprint for Managers. And these self-directed learning hubs can also have some interactive elements where people can learn about the benefits of creating a diverse and inclusive workplace, but also allow them to use the right language when discussing these topics and discussing topics that they might be unfamiliar with. The next thing that you want to do is to make sure that it is easy for managers to access this support. Now, very often we've come across, and this is something that we do with our own business resource group, is that we offer all managers the ability to write into our business resource group confidentially to ask for some advice should they have some questions about LGBT issues. But equally important, another avenue for managers to get this support is for them to get mentoring and reverse mentoring. Get them to mentor a junior LGBT colleague or get junior LGBT colleagues to reverse mentor more senior managers. But you can also have, in addition to these mentoring and reverse mentoring tools, Diversity Days conferences and seminars, much like the Out and Equal conference, much like this webinar that many of you are attending, in order to get managers more comfortable with the topics that we're discussing and make them feel comfortable to discuss it not just with their employees, but also their teams. So you have the business case. You kind of understand the elements that you might want to include in the training and ongoing support that you want to offer to your managers. But then how do you evaluate the success of your efforts to engage middle managers? And this brings us to the last section of the top tips that we want to give you today. Now, evaluating success is not just about quantifying success, it's also about rewarding those who champion inclusive behaviors. So you can have something like a leaderboard of successes where you celebrate the best manager of the month or someone who has done something quite special that month to recognize LGBT equality. You could also have diversity, or actually you should recommend that diversity be a standing item in diversity and inclusion meetings or also team meetings and town halls. You should champion the use of inclusive language. So very often, the reason that we receive as to why inappropriate language is used is because managers say, oh, it was just a bit of fun. But once you start championing and educating people about the harm that language can do and also the benefits of using inclusive language across all your communications, it could be something that will enrich the conversation that managers have, not just with their team members, but also within the broader organization as a whole. You need to encourage managers to be more visible, and that's also a measure of success. profiling allies and role models is a good way to go about it. You want, in some organizations, people wear badges that says, I am an ally, and that often provokes a conversation. People come up to that individual and ask, what does it mean to be an ally? And that could be a good way of raising visibility. You also want to create an environment where LGBT employees, especially LGBT managers, feel comfortable to step forward and be role models and share their stories. Many people have stories that might not be fully antiseptic. It might be very colorful, and to get these stories out there will get a much broader population engaged. Appoint active senior champions. Sometimes we get into the risk of having senior champions who sign their name against LGBT equality but stay passive supporters of the cause. We want senior champions, and the most effective senior champions are the ones who are involved and hands-on, people who attend the meetings, attend the events, speak at events, advise the business resource group leadership teams about how to go about engaging the workforce. And that's a great way to ensure that the senior champions get as much as they give to their business resource groups. But if you definitely wanted to put down numbers and quantify successes, what you could do is ensure you could have a tool such as monitoring, where you look at specifically what percentage of a manager's team has completed diversity training. You could also look at performance appraisals, where you put in specific targets related to diversity and inclusion or related to promoting a diverse and inclusive work environment, and ask them to talk about their successes in relation to that performance criteria. You can also look at the appointment criteria for managers. When you are looking to interview managers, whether for internal or external roles, ensure that you're querying the diversity and inclusion achievements that they've made in their previous roles. That way you know whether they're being serious about their commitment to diversity and whether they understand if this is a tick box exercise or something that has more meaning to the broader workplace success. So we hope that this kind of gives you the basics of what we think a good place to start would be in creating your own toolkit for engaging middle managers. We've walked you through some of the elements of our toolkit, but we've also told you about the feedback that we received during the live session that we conducted at the last Out and Equal session in Orlando. With that, I'm going to open it out to questions and answers, and Pat, if you would help me, I can help direct the questions back to the panelists.
Certainly, and great job, Vignesh, and everybody on the panel. We've got lots of good questions. There's a lot of questions about how did you get the buy-in from senior management, and is it mandatory for the middle managers to take this course, or how do you get them engaged in wanting to do this?
That's a really good question, and I'll defer to Therese in just a second to give more information on it, but I think that to get senior managers buy-in, it is, when I mentioned about the business case, it's important to articulate it to them in terms that they find valuable. Explain to them, in the case of our organization, that it will genuinely impact our attrition levels. It would ensure that employees are more loyal. It would ensure that employees feel more comfortable to contribute their unique perspectives. And these are all things that senior managers value, because ultimately it means that the company makes more money and it's more valuable, and the employees become a more valuable asset thereby. But Therese, would you like to add something to that answer?
Yeah, so what I would add to that, and thank you for adding that, Vignesh, because or starting with that, because I think that's the message that we ask our senior-most managers to articulate. And then our strategy for Blueprint really was to cascade it, right? And so the aha moment that we had is that when you talk about middle management and middle managers and you think about what the objectives are that they're given for the year, the conversations that they typically have with their managers and with management around what their objectives and goals and targets are for the year, diversity and inclusion is often not explicitly discussed or mentioned. And so what we wanted to make sure of, because I think in your organizations like ours, people are keenly focused on what their manager expects from them and what they expect them to deliver. So our strategy for Blueprint was to pick an organizational level that was high enough where we could really cascade it throughout an organization. So the way that works is we pick a senior leader, we do it around their management table, and so not only does that management table have takeaways and a mandate to continue the conversation in terms of tracking progress against the 2 or 3 action items that they identify, as well as for the manager with his directs or her directs to track their individual commitments through their one-on-ones or their ongoing management conversations. We also task the managers around that table to turn around and do it with their management teams. And so it then creates a cascading effect where people are starting to hear the messaging, not from on high, but from their manager, right, and their management chain. And it becomes this cascading effect down the management chain that my boss cares about this, my boss's boss cares about this, like this is a focus. And so the thought there was that that really was going to be a differentiator in terms of how managers received this, as well as their commitment to follow up and to actually taking action. So that's how we cascade it. It becomes, the homework, the takeaway. Again, we try to avoid words like mandatory, because then people feel like this is just a check the box or this is some political, correctness exercise. But really frame it in terms of, as Vignesh said, this is something that's really going to help you, drive employee engagement and to achieve better results as part of your team, and we want to have an open dialogue around this particular topic. And Don, I don't know if you want to comment from a Building Bridges standpoint around how we get the uptake for building bridges.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an exact science, to be honest. Oftentimes it is somebody within a business group who feels impassioned about, LGBT employees in the workplace. That could be an ally. It could be an LGBT employee. It could be a manager. Typically what we find is when we can get in front of the manager and give them a flavor for the course and show them how powerful the messaging is, there isn't much of a sale because they're like, wow, like we would benefit from this. This would be great. I want to do this. So any way we can get the door open, we'll take any opening we can get.
Yeah, and we do mention in our Blueprint for Managers the fact that Building Bridges exists, and we're also working with our learning and development organization to make sure that they understand that this is also, a tool in their arsenal that they can leverage as well as they're thinking about diversity and inclusion training and manager engagement.
And this is that, so we're talking about the class. There were a couple of questions that were asked about the content, like the example of the photos, or talking about the scenarios, about kind of giving people an idea of what those look like.
In terms of the content of the blueprint part?
The actual course, probably the Building Bridges.
I think that's Building Bridges, Vignesh.
Oh, yes. Don?
Okay, so I'm sorry, what specifically, the workplace scenarios that are at the end of the training, or the images?
One of both, talking about the introspection, the images that you selected, you talked about a little bit, but then how about a scenario? What would that look like that they would be working?
Sure. So a workplace scenario might look like something along the following lines. An employee who reports within your group sees a coworker tear down a pride poster on bank premises, comes to you as the manager, reports the activity, and we try to layer in, a few levels of whether in fact, did it really happen? Did it not happen? What was the motivation? Was it an accident? So that we get the dynamic dialogue around, activity versus belief, behavior. But that would be one example of a real life manager situation that you may be faced with. And again, I think by presenting it in the way of a day in the life of a manager, it really engages them in the problem solving and the discussion.
Excellent. Sounds good. I had one more quick question. We're just about ready to wrap up, but question on the self-ID about how many folks that responded had self-ID. But they said, why did you decide to make it part of the HR record? Why that became a business priority?
Yeah, so the challenge with doing self-identification only as part of a confidential survey is that you don't have an ability really to track information year over year or to do any type of trending or tracking of employees with that information. The one thing that I didn't add, and I should have around the self-identification, and maybe this goes without saying, is that there is not broad access to this data, right? So access to the data is actually limited to just the members of the core diversity team. So it is not something that managers have ready access to or HR colleagues have access to. And again, it's so that we can, safeguard an employee's confidentiality and privacy, but also to be able to do that type of trending, right? If you don't have it as part of their employee record, it's really a point-in-time measurement, which only has so much value in terms of looking at trends around culture, climate over time, and whether or not we're actually impacting the percentage of employees that, for instance, are out in the workplace, right? Are we really creating a culture where an employee feels comfortable or safe doing that? Are we seeing increases in our numbers? Are there attrition problems that may come to light when you can do the tracking and trending information with respect to LGBT employees? So that's why we actually opted to make it part of the employee record.
And moreover, Therese, I think it's also true that knowing specifically who your LGBT employees are that are okay being self-ID'd, it gives them opportunities for participation in leadership activities that are targeted for LGBT employees. Potentially if you're focusing on your LGBT population for advancement, you have to know who they are first. So it's sort of a first step to helping them help themselves in a sense. And Therese, I don't know if you agree with that.
Thank you, Don. No, absolutely, absolutely. And that kind of echoes some of the points that I made around self-identification, right, and why we wanted to do it. So thank you.
Agreed.
And we have a series of other questions, but we're on our time spot here. And what we do is we usually ask our panelists after the call to kind of send some responses in, and then we get that out through our blogs. And so we'll do that as well. But I did want to give all of you an opportunity to make a closing comment. Any highlights? Vignesh, I want to go ahead and start and let you lead that.
Sure, thank you. It was an absolute pleasure to deliver this session and moderate this session on behalf of JPMorgan Chase today, and we hope that you learned as much from it as we learned from having these questions asked. Over to you, Therese.
Thank you, Vignesh. I think, my closing remark would really be, to stay persistent. It takes time. I often liken making changes, especially in an organization as large as the likes of a JPMorgan Chase, is like turning a battleship. But at the same time, it is incredibly rewarding when you're able to make these steps forward and see that the work that you're doing is actually positively impacting the lives of our employees and the overall health of our organization. So, it may take time, and persistence and patience are key to moving forward on any of these journeys that we've outlined for you, but the payoff is certainly there.
All right.
So this is Don. Just to put a personal spin on it, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to share this information. Really appreciate that. As the leader of a BRG at a large firm, I think what I can share is I walk the walk and I talk the talk because I am LGBT, and I do this as a volunteer activity because I know how important it is in the lives of our employees, and just feel so fortunate that we have not only a great firm that supports these efforts, but also great organizations like Out and Equal that understand how important it is to be out at work.
Great.
And I'll chime in here at the end. Thank you, Pat. We look forward to seeing you all at the Workplace Summit in Philadelphia. So we'll address the questions over the blogs and emails, but if you want to meet us in person, come meet us there. We'll be there. Thanks, Pat.
Excellent. Thank you all very much. Great panel, great discussion. Lots of good participation, so I thank all of the attendees as well. There'll be a short survey when the call ends, and our next virtual summit will actually talk about one of the topics that were mentioned in that reverse mentoring. So please join us on February 7th. More questions about training, be sure to reach out and contact me. And we use some of the Building Bridges program basis as our core, so there's lots of information available. So thanks, and have a good week, and we'll see you next week.